So we are here today with the amazing photographer, Kyle Kirkwood. Hey, Kyle.
Thanks so much for having me, Cheryl.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. I'm a big fan of your work. I saw some of the campaign that you did. Was that with Orbay, with Andrew Lee?
Yeah, Andrew Lee is one of their like pro artists. So there was a lot of Orbe products on set for sure. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your background. Like, how did you get started as a photographer?
At a super young age, there was like a genuine interest in the creative like arts and stuff, and I just was never good at fine art when it came to drawing or painting or different mediums like that. But once something clicked with me with photography, that's kind of when it took over. So it was super young. I might have been in like grade 7 or grade 8 was when I started to kind of play around with it. And then as the years continued, I fell in love with a little bit more like film photography through high school and that process. Just spending time in the dark room, making my own prints and enlargements. Like it was just such an interesting process that was so hands-on and tangible to actually like see some of it come to life. And when I couldn't make those visions come to life with my like drawings or sketches or paintings, I found myself frustrated. So with photography, I was starting to be able to like execute some of those visions. And then I pursued photography in post-secondary at Sheridan College. And I was able to get my honors bachelor degree from Sheridan. So that was super cool. And that's kind of where it all sparked, at least the beginning stages prior to me doing this like professionally outside of a school and context.
Right. So it sounds like you're a pretty artistic and creative kid.
I guess so. I guess I was just like a little sensitive kid that just like enjoyed the arts and I loved music and just but yeah, I guess I would say that for the most part, I always liked art. I never found myself to be one of those like artsy kids, but I found myself hanging out with them in art class, and yeah, I just connected and bonded with them. It was fun.
Yeah, I think once you're an artist, you can translate that into so many different mediums, whether it's fine art or photography or sculpture or hair for that matter, like whatever it is, you just translate that creativity into whatever your craft is.
Absolutely, and I think that's like the biggest thing is like when I think I view it as a craft, and I view my photography as like a tool to be able to for me to be able to make money as my career. But I never saw myself as like an artist, which is so strange to say. But like if through the process of being on more of a commercial front and partnering with different like marketing agencies or brands that I help execute visions and align with their brands, like I enjoyed that element for some reason. Like helping them bring their ideas to life seems fun because I never like I never was the person ideating and creating these like concepts and stuff. So school stretched me in those ways, which was fun, but I really like partnering with brands and helping them create those visuals. So the term artist always feels weird for me to own, but it's true. I guess I'm a creative, I'm an artist.
Yeah. And then, you're talking about creative direction. And as a photographer, you really have a big percentage in the say of how things come to life on set because everyone comes in with their concepts and their ideas and their mood boards and all those things, and then okay, like all eyes on you because now you're the director, you're in charge, and then you're the one that needs to execute everyone's concept.
Oh, absolutely. And do I feel the weight of that when I'm on set? The answer is yes. Sometimes it's just like, my goodness, like the pressure. So executing that vision or that creative direction sometimes can feel stressful. But over the years, you kind of learn what's in your tool belt and like what I can use as a resource and pull from with just like knowledge and experience. So it starts to get a little bit lighter to carry. But at the beginning, man, do you feel that pressure of like, okay, people have ideas here and they have vision, so like you better be able to like step up to the bar and like help them reach that. So it's a cool challenge, and the more years you get into it, the more confident you feel being able to pull from a larger kind of tool belt of resources. So it's fun, but yes, it is tricky to be the one feeling like, okay, everyone's got these ideas and visions, and it's like, now execute, now
Yeah.
do it, and help them.
You're like the final stop. You're the guy that has to like pull this off now, and there's so many people involved in a shoot, obviously. So,
Oh, truly. And you can see when people are loving it and when people are struggling and they're like, it's not there yet. And we're all looking for that extra 5 to 10% just to make it sparkle a bit more when we're on set. So sometimes you can see that. And so it's helpful to be able to also like read the room and know that. But you're right. It's like I am that last stop before let's just say post-production, because I know that that sometimes can help to execute or elevate the project or the brand's vision. And so anyways, yeah, that I do feel like sometimes I'm that final stop of the ideation process.
Sure. Have you ever had like a really scary moment on set or something memorable where you're like, oh shit, what am I gonna do?
What, luckily I can say not.
Oh, good.
I have not had a very scary moment on set. I think I internally can feel the nerves or those anxious feelings of like, is the client liking it? But I'd say for the most part, everyone walks away happy. And honestly, at the end of the day, if the client is happy, or if we're doing a creative and the team is happy, then I'm happy. But so I can say that I've not had any scary moments where we've had to like book reshoots or the client isn't happy. So I feel very fortunate. Yeah.
Or like the main model doesn't show up or something, and then you look around, you're like, the stylist, she's cute, let's shoot her, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I've definitely had those. There was one time I was on set, and we were in LA, and they just didn't show. Like the talent just didn't show. So that was unfortunate. And that was just a creative, like partnering with their like PR and stuff. So I guess there was maybe nothing on the very rewarding for them, let's say. So yeah, I just got like stood up, so talent didn't show up, so that shoot flopped. But I've also had models like call last minute being sick, and stuff like that. So you quickly call and you're like, anybody in town, and they just is like, let's see what we can do. So yeah, there's some stressful moments for sure where you're like problem solving in the moment. That would be the scariest moment for sure.
Yeah. Do you think you've had like a career changing moment or like an opportunity that's just kind of catapulted you into, you know, more success or more recognition?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think that between my third and my fourth year of my degree, when I was studying, our schooling made us do an internship. Like we had to complete a certain amount of hours, and you had that freedom to kind of study underneath another photographer or company at your choice. And so I decided to go to New York City. And so I would say that doing my internship in New York City for Greg Swales or with Greg Swales was like a very pivotal moment for me. Not only because he's just like incredible, he's a wealth of knowledge and has incredible experience. And I think he's a true visionary. Like when I say like, I'm not an artist, I look at him and I'm like, he's an artist. Like he is incredible. So I'd say for me, that was a pivotal moment where I gained access to somebody who I thought was just incredible and brilliant and like just creatively unstoppable. And so that was really cool. So for me, tapping into some of that, and luckily he's just like an angel. He's the sweetest human. And so he was very open and willing to just share experience, share feedback, and I would share my work and he'd share thoughts and he'd, you know, let me know how I could improve. So at a young age, being able to do that internship was pivotal. And then as his career, he was already incredibly successful, but as his career continued to grow,
he's
astronomical. Yeah, he's a huge name now, right? And so one of those like household names in fashion, in my opinion, like the countless covers, countless iconic covers, and so and campaigns, and so it was great. As I left school and was no longer doing my post-secondary education, I continued to work with Greg, both on set and also remotely. And so I was able to do some retouching for him and be on set for some of those campaigns and editorials. And so it was really fun to be able to watch him, witness him, interact with clients and also talent on set, and just see how he can create this vision or like execute this vision he has in his head. And so that for me felt pivotal, to be able to just witness somebody so brilliant execute their work. So that felt cool for me. And I try sometimes, I'm like, how can I channel my inner Greg, like how can I be that, just because I think he's amazing.
Yeah. Well, small side story about Greg. My background's fashion design, and I used to design a line of swimwear. And somehow, and Greg was living in Vancouver, and I forget how the connection happened, but I ended up sending my swimwear to Greg, and he's Cuban, right? He's from Cuba. So he took my stuff to Cuba and he shot the most beautiful shoots with my swimwear, which I still have today, which is beautiful. Oh, so nice. I knew him from like a million years ago, before he was, I mean, he was great back then, but yeah, to see him grow. And I mean, that must have just been such a great experience, because it's really important to have a mentor right? To someone who you can emulate, or you can see how they have created their success, and take some of those takeaways so that you can do that for yourself. So I think it's important.
Yeah, also I would love to see those photos of the swimwear.
Yeah,
I'm sure they probably he's like the king of being able to shoot locations and stuff like that, just at such an insane level. But I would say the mentorship was incredible. Like that truly is change, like it can be life changing and career changing when you connect with the right mentors that help you level up and just have genuine desire to see you grow and do better. I think that's huge. And when you can find somebody that has like a pure heart that just wants to see you succeed, game changing. So that to me, I think was the big moment.
For sure. Now, do you shoot more hair world stuff or fashion stuff, or I guess it's a little bit of everything? Like, what do you think you're focusing on more?
Yeah, I would say that for my work, I kind of put it under the umbrella of fashion and beauty. And so probably a little bit more with a beauty focus, to be honest. Stuff for different cosmetic brands. I've worked with Estee Lauder and MAC Cosmetics, and done some work for Sephora. So those are some of like the larger beauty brands that I've connected with and done some work with. And on I do a little bit less on the fashion front. I would say when I was doing more retouching, I was doing it kind of 50-50. I maybe did more retouching for fashion brands. But there's a local designer in Toronto named Money Jessel, and I've done some fashion shoots for her. So some stuff like that. But I would say I'm also trying to branch out into a little bit more of just the commercial world in general. Shooting like a TV poster for CBC was really fun when they had a new show launch. I believe it was back in January, called Ghosting. And so that was cool. And I just recently had a shoot. I can't mention what it is, but it's for like an alcohol company. And so that's really exciting to just start to branch out into different areas, because I love the fashion and beauty focus. But it's really fun to take on new challenges where I can do stuff like a gallery shoot for CBC, or do something like a little bit more product based, but also product with models for a different like alcohol company. So very fun to challenge myself.
Mm-hmm. Would you say you have a signature style? Like, if we look at your work, we know that's a Kyle shot. Like, is there something specific in the way you like to shoot that kind of brands you, or in a way that you set up your sets, or anything particular?
Yeah, I wish I had a better answer. I think without trying, I think a lot of creatives or photographers have that individualistic kind of like style, or that fingerprint. Like there's something that makes it recognizable to their own style, or just how they see things. And so how they visually kind of communicate stories or ideas. I'm sure it's there. I don't know if I necessarily intentionally do anything. I'm sure it's subconscious that I take certain approaches or how I light certain things. I would say that my approach is always that I want it to be timeless, and I want it to be a little bit classic. So sometimes through my work, people will say like, oh, like there's like classic kind of elements of beauty. And I think that's true. And I want that. I don't want to be the zeitgeisty photographer. And it's not that it's bad. It's just never been my focus or my goal. I want my images, 10 to 20 years from now to still be beautiful photographs that I can say I'm genuinely like proud of, and could potentially stand next to future work 20 years down the road. The same way that we can respect and love, like Peter Lindbergh's work, or, like some of those kind of classic people, or like, I'm trying to think, but like Annie Leibovitz, like you cannot deny that her photographs 20 years ago were equally as beautiful as now. And I'm not by any means comparing myself to either of those people, but I aspire to have work that can stand a test of time. So I don't know if I try to do anything specific stylistically with my work that makes it like a Kyle Kirkwood photograph, but people have shared like, oh, I could tell that was your work. There's something about it that some people can just I guess recognize it, but I don't do anything specific, I guess I would say.
Yeah. But you do your own post, so that also helps to define your style, right? Because if you send it out and you know the skin is kind of like non-existent and you have that kind of almost mannequin look, or are you more like a real skin, you know, you want to see pores but you still just create little perfections? I mean, there's such a gamut of like one side to the other when it comes to that type of photography, you know, like the Instagram face or whatever, or like the super filtered look. Yeah, I think you're more on the natural side but clean.
Yes, yeah, I agree. So I think I think photography itself, I'm sure I take my own kind of like um angles and whatnot, but when it comes to post-production, that definitely is like I do on my own, and I'm sure that is like that final stamp of like what a Kyle Kirkwood image would look like. So I think you're very right on that. And sending it out to different retouchers, I'm sure there would be just like different approaches. And so you're right that that keeps a level of consistency across the board for me. But yes, and I think that when I learn like skin retouching and stuff like that, or when I was learning, you very easily you can have a tendency to overdo it. And so there's times too where I'm still pulling back, trying to be like, okay, real, like leave the messy hairs, leave some of this, leave some of that, like leave some imperfection, because we look, you know, like we want to look real in our photographs too. And the same way we want real people to see real people in advertisements and stuff like that. So I'm trying to reel it back and keep it more raw and natural, but I do like a very clean, polished kind of classic approach.
Yeah. Yeah, and when it comes to hair or hair shoots, you can tell when it looks like they might as well be on a green screen with this like cutout, you know, paper doll cutout sort of look to them when things are just way too perfect around the edges. Like imperfection just looks more, I don't know, appealing almost. You know, it's just like you instantly call out fake when you see that kind of stuff.
Yes, and definitely you can tell if somebody either looks cut out or if something's been overly processed in post. So I agree. When it comes to hair shoots, the more I have done stuff with different like hair companies, you start to learn a little bit more like, okay, what can we leave, and what can we not afford to leave? Like what's going to make something look messy, and what's going to look kind of perfectly undone in a way. Like a little bit tussled is different than, you know, like a knot on the side of someone's head. So learning what to do and what not to do is huge.
Yeah. Have you shot any campaigns that stylists have been using for any of these competitions, like hair competition stuff, or is it more just on the fashion and the brand side?
It's more on the brand side. I haven't done anything with any competitions. I've been approached in the past, but I think it was scheduling wise, like nothing came of it. But yeah, more so just on like hair extension companies. Yeah.
Now, you go way back when it comes to learning about photography. So you've shot with film, you've done darkroom work. You know, we've evolved so much, you know, technologically wise. What do you think of that whole change? Like, do you appreciate the digital world? Do you miss the analog photography world? You know, what's your preference on those two?
Yeah, I do think that there's an element when you're learning film, and I was so young that even then, like when I was coming into it and experiencing film, I would still say it was in a very like digital age. And so I can't say that I like miss a film industry. I think there's so many levels of like efficiency now that we have because of going digital. It makes so much more sense when I can have a digital tech on set and there's like 3 monitors. You know, he's got one, I've got my own that's on wheels and a remote battery, and the client's got their own, and you can wheel it around. Like those just didn't exist when we had film, right? Like you'd be sending out assistants to get stuff, you know,
Polaroid, shooting a Polaroid, like
doing light tests with like Polaroids and all these things, right? So it was and you'd have assistants like loading your film. It was just different. It was a different world. So I would say from an efficiency point of view, like digital's great, but I think there's also something so romantic and like textural about film photography. There's something that doesn't necessarily always translate the same when it comes to like digital. And so I think that's where the photographer themselves have to put on that artist hat when it comes to like tones and really working with some of that like color grading and the post-production element to bring back some of that texture, or maintain texture, I should say. So I think as a kid, when I was learning film, it was cool. I romanticized the idea of spending my like lunch breaks in a dark room and developing photos and making these prints. Like that was fun. But as a professional, I don't know how I would have the time to do it. And so there's benefits to being on like a computer system and being very digital and having everything so like quickly accessible, and flying through my Capture One and like making my selects fast. I'm not viewing contact sheets or making contact sheets
Yeah,
in a
like
dark.
that loop, you know, and yeah.
Yeah, it's a different process.
Now we just go like this. We just expand before we this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've been shooting for many years too. I mean, I used to shoot because I'm a makeup artist and stylist, so we used to shoot film back in the day. I think it trains both the photographer. I think it trains everybody that's part of a shoot on set, if you were part of that era, to be very specific and do your best on set and try not to leave too much to post, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, or we just go now, oh, well, let's just leave that. Like, you know, there's a pimple, we don't care, that will be fixed later in post, or the hair is a little off on one side, we'll just fix that in post. But if you're an old schooler like us, then you try and get it right on set and try and do the best perfection you possibly can instead of relying on post.
Yeah, and which is so true. And I think there's something to be said about having a hybrid or a mix of the two, like finding that equal balance, because you can tell when you're working with artists on set that are highly skilled, they're so meticulous, and it's so helpful because it really does make the back end process so much easier. So you can appreciate somebody with a very keen eye that's on set and they're being very perfect and not reliant on post. But yes, like I would say, I'm sure nowadays that we just rely a little bit too heavily, or we just like, we shoot so much that we're not as particular about crafting specific moments, right? It's kind of like shoot, hope for the best, or just shoot a lot. And maybe some of that artistry is slowly fading, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe that like the newer generation that only knows that and realizes, okay, we can fix this later, or we'll do this later kind of thing, might have more of that mentality. I don't know, but it's more like an appreciation for the photographer and all the post time that they have to do to make it perfect as much as you possibly can on set.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah. So do you have like a memorable event or job or whatever in your career that really stands out to you? Like something that you were like, yeah, that was great, or you just felt so good when you walked away, or you felt like you accomplished so much, or there was so much work to be done and you did it and you're just so proud of yourself.
Yeah, I think recently there's been a few. I say recent, within the last couple years, but I think the first time I ever got to work with MAC Cosmetics was probably at least one of the most rewarding or most surreal moments. That was really cool, to be able to actually like walk into stores and see my images on packaging on these like bundle kind of like gift. It wasn't a gift bag, but it was like a bundle bag that they had created with influencers. That was really cool. It's one of those moments where you start to actually see your work out in the wild that you're like, oh my goodness, like this is crazy. Like this goes from like my computer screen to like print in stores and in customers' hands. Like there's something rewarding about seeing it like that. So I'd say the first two campaign shoots that I did with MAC Cosmetics was very, very fun. And I mean, other things too, like it's not in the photography standpoint, but from a retouching perspective, I've done a lot of retouching as well professionally, and seeing like Times Square billboards is pretty cool.
You had a Times Square billboard?
Yeah, there's been a few. And so yeah, just having some involvement with stuff for Kylie Cosmetics. Again, this would have been through the connection of Greg Swales, but having some post-production involvement on that end, like in partnership with Greg, is very cool to be able to see photos and just like that's a bit of a milestone that sometimes you don't think that you'll ever reach.
We can't get any bigger than Times Square screen.
Yeah, it's very true. Yeah, so that's cool. And again, I can't take credit for any photography or anything like that. Like again, he's such a visionary, but I think that being at least a small role in that, involved in it, like being a team member, is really cool to say that I worked on some of those projects. And then again recently the CBC campaign, like seeing digital billboards around Toronto, seeing commercials and stuff like that on TV, like that's really fun. It just feels like the tiny little pat on the back that sometimes you need to give yourself, to remind yourself like, oh, you're doing it, you know, like you were some little kid that went to art school and like kind of got thrown into the wild and you're just like doing the best you can. And sometimes you have those moments where you're like, oh yeah, whoa, like you're doing it,
Yeah.
like you're no longer that little kid, but you're like, you're out there and you're doing the best you can. And so sometimes those moments just feel like, I don't know, the pat on the back you need.
For sure. Is there any brand or campaign or person or whatever that's on your radar that you'd really like to shoot?
Ooh, a little lofty. Like, I mean, like one day, far down the road, it'd be so fun to shoot something for like Chanel Beauty, or shoot stuff with Louis Vuitton. Like, I mean, I just love like stylistically, I think I like their approach. So maybe those two brands. Um, I'm trying to think. I also just like on a like it's still very large but smaller, like more on a Canadian level. Like I love Simons and I love the way that they shoot ecom. And so I also just like love Simons as a company. And so it'd be cool to one day be able to like go to Montreal and do some work with them. But yeah, so brands like that.
Yeah, I mean, print. I don't. I'm a big fan of print, but what do you think? Is print dead?
Like editorial speaking, I fear for it, right? Like I think it's pretty gone, unfortunately. I think you're seeing, magazines do these like biannual type prints where they feel a little bit more substantial or significant when they do choose to do those. But yeah, like it's hard. I don't know if people are consuming it the same way. I don't know if people are putting their money into print. So I don't know if the advertising dollars are there. So these poor print publications are just struggling, I think. But I think so many people did it because of the passion for it, creating these beautiful editorials. And I feel like maybe people are losing the incentive behind that because there's not the same type of credibility or like credentials behind having some of those tear sheets.
Yeah.
So,
So do you think that photographers just aren't shooting these editorials anymore because where are they going? I guess just digitally, but is
yeah,
that going away or is that just changing?
yeah, I think, and maybe for myself, I can only speak for myself. I think I started to try to put more energy into smaller publications and not climb that ladder, but just slowly get a little bit more recognition, working with different um, publications. And you just start to get to a point where you realize you're like, oh, this maybe isn't like necessarily getting the reach that I expected it to, or it almost feels like you're trying to work at something that feels like a dead end. And you're like, am I putting all this work into editorial that either isn't getting the eyes on it that I was hoping, it's not getting me the attention needed? Because oftentimes that's how you used to book some of those larger clients, is they'd be the ones flipping through magazines and they'd look at the credits and be like, oh, so cool, Kyle Kirkwood shot this. But now I don't know if we're getting the magazines into the right hands or that it's just getting in hands, period. And so I do think we've de-incentivized people to actually like put the effort and time and money into those shoots.
Yeah. Websites obviously are the transition now. So I guess we still do see editorials or whatever kind of fashion spreads, beauty spreads in digital format now. So I guess that's just the transition. I'm hoping it's not going away because we still want to see that inspiration and that storyline of 6 to 10 shots or whatever that might be. We don't want to see that creativity go away.
No, and sometimes that's what keeps you fueled, right? Like I think, like I was sharing earlier about executing somebody else's vision and how that does still give me life and excites me. That isn't always the case, and isn't always the case for everybody. Whereas sometimes you'd land those editorials that would kind of keep you creatively inspired and motivated, and it would give you that little like fire under you to keep going. And so you're right, like we'd hate to see that fire kind of burn out if we lose editorial entirely. And I don't think we will. I don't think you can. As long as we have people that are kind of notable or celebrities or this and that, like as long as we have fame, people want to see those stories. People want to see the cover stories with the people they love. And so I don't think we'll see that die off. But
well, and fashion brands still need to showcase their designs. So aside from doing their own campaigns, that is how they showcased the latest collection, whatever season that might be.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, we almost lost runway shows. Like that whole thing with COVID just came to a halt, and we were thinking, how is it going to come back? But thankfully, that came back in the same way. I don't think that much has changed on the fashion show front, but definitely on the editorial magazine front, things have changed.
Yes, I agree. I agree with you on that.
Yeah. So, what would you tell someone who's starting out as a photographer in the business? What would be their first steps to get the ball rolling?
Um, I would say don't give up. Like there's going to be so many moments that you are going to tire. So find ways to stay creatively inspired. Photograph your friends, photograph like friends that want to start companies, work with people like that, friends and family, and do things that just keep you creatively inspired, because it can be tricky when you are freelance, and maybe they won't be, but oftentimes creatives are freelance, or at least photographers are freelance, and so it's tricky. But yeah, keep inspired, keep your head up, be a nice person, be easy to work with. I always say it, but like be the kindest person in the room. Like there's no space for ego, especially when you're the like photographer. There's going to be so many other voices in the room, and so sometimes you need to also just be aware of that. And so be kind, be easy to work with, be patient. People are spending 8 to 12 hours with you in a room all day. So maintain those good like connections and relationships with clients, because that's super important.
Well, and that's the thing too, because your reputation and how fun you are to work with, or how great and efficient, or whatever it is that you do so well, makes your reputation, and it makes people want to work with you again, whether that's brands or just the crew, the team themselves. It's really crucial in order to keep that going and keep your reputation high.
Oh, absolutely. And word of mouth is huge when it like people will share positive stories and interactions that they've had with you, right? So it's incredible how much being a nice person can get you. Like it can take you farther, right? Like there's a lot of us talented people out there, and I know that if I was not great and not pleasant to work with, somebody else can replace me. I just know that. And it's not undermining my own skill set, but it's just, I would say, like, focus on being just a joy to work with, while staying creatively fueled.
Yeah, hopefully gone are the days of when the photographer just had a massive ego and was ordering people around and that kind of thing. Like,
yeah, I think it's gone. I'm sure it exists to some degree, but I think for the most part, we've done away with that in many like areas and many different sectors. People have kind of lost the ability to hold that type of a role. Yeah.
And now with the digital space and everyone has the ability to create a brand, there's so much ability to create content because everyone has their own Instagram page or website or whatever. Like, it just seems there's so much more entrepreneurial digital businesses out there. So how do you tap into that world? Or you just kind of go on Instagram and look for the brands you like and reach out to them and say, hey, I should shoot for you? Or
Yeah.
is there any advice on that for anyone starting out?
Yeah, I think it's a great point to, like, not only has like the creative sector become more saturated, but it's also just provided more opportunity for work, which is awesome. As we continue to have more photographers enter the space, it feels like more businesses also enter the space. So there's enough to go around for everybody, which is great. But I'd say the biggest thing is probably focusing on which brands you feel you creatively align with. You're both speaking the same visual language, I think is key and is needed. And so sometimes going to these different PR events or these areas that you can network and meet people, and then doing your research after the fact and making sure that you kind of creatively align, and then just fostering that relationship, like reaching out to a brand and asking to either like swing by their office or grab coffee with somebody from the team. I think it's important. And sometimes the cold call or those cold emails can feel uncomfortable, and like nobody really enjoys it, but we all know we have to do it. So sometimes you just have to send that email. And somebody once shared this information to me, is not asking, like, what do you do? So sometimes it's not looking at like what the brand can offer you, but sometimes you have to reframe and restructure to see like, what can I offer you? What can I do for you? So sometimes going into conversations, sharing more about what you do and what you could bring to the table for that person or that business is so helpful. So sometimes maybe putting on kind of that pair of glasses or that lens of like, what can I bring to the table for this company? How could I connect with them and help them? And not in a way where you're like, hey, here are the gaps and here are the areas that like your business is suffering. It's like, I'm not saying that, but the idea of just like, how can we best kind of work together?
Yeah, because you have to be enticing to the person or the company or whatever that you want to work for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, versus just being like, hi, I really love your stuff. I want to work for you. But it's like, why, right? You really need to show your value or, or come up with some reason why that they should work with you.
Absolutely. And I think it shows that you've done a little bit more research when you know more about the brand and that you feel like you truly do have a better understanding of them instead of the format of like, a structured email or phone call that just kind of gets copied and pasted. You don't want that. It is a very individual experience working with me the same way that it's going to be working with certain people at different companies. And so I want that to feel like I'm a little bit more invested in it. And then that way too, it's like I'm not having to field emails of companies I also don't know if I actually want to work with either, right? So sometimes you have to just make sure that you are both on the same page. So yeah, that helps for sure.
Do you have an agent?
I don't have an agent. I'm still freelance. I'm independent.
Do you think it's a good idea to have an agent?
I was going to say, it's not something that I that I never want. I think an agent would be great as long as they're exposing me to the right clients in the right market. I think it would be super helpful. So maybe one day I would have one. Right now, I don't, but we'll see. Like maybe that will change in a couple years. I'd love to kind of maybe it sounds bad, but like shop around and just see like the same way I was talking about like other companies needing little areas filled, the same way I want to look at somebody's roster of photographers that they represent. And I don't want to go into a setting where then I'm going to be competing with somebody already on their roster. I want to be able to go in and say, hey, I bring something different to the table and I can expose you to new clients. I can expose you to a new sector or like industry that maybe you haven't fully tapped into either. So like we can both be mutually beneficial and expose you to different forms of revenue. So it's like, this is going to be mutually beneficial if we partner together. And it's not that I haven't found that, it's maybe that I haven't prioritized that yet. But maybe one day I'd have an agent. I think that'd be great. I would love to grow continually. And so if I find the right person that I can grow with, then I'll start investing into those kinds of relationships.
Yeah, that's great. One little question about on set. How do you bring out the best in your model? How do you bring out the best angles, the best personality? Obviously everyone's different and you shoot models from different angles based on what it is that's required of the brand. So how do you figure that out?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take you on a little story, but I one time I was on set with Reuven Afanador, and he's a photographer. I think his first language is Spanish, if I'm correct, and so he's a little bit softer spoken. He's quieter. And maybe I share that element about Spanish because maybe just English not being his first language, maybe there's a level of like timidness when he's speaking English with his subjects. But he is just the kindest, sweetest person on set. And I always thought that the photographer had to be the like big, loud, boisterous, outgoing, confident, like
loudest guy in the room kind of thing.
Yeah, loudest guy in the room to like pull something out of this person, get this energy going. And something shifted and something clicked for me when I was on set with Reuven, and he was so quiet. It was almost like he was like whispering behind the camera to his subjects, and he was doing light tests on me. So I had the experience of like, what does it feel like to be his subject? And it was really cool where I had this moment of just connecting with him. And even though there's a room full of like 25 people, it's just you and him. And there was something comforting, and I felt very like settled and at peace. And so for me, moving forward, I realized I'm not the loud guy on set. I just won't be. It's not in my makeup, my character. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to be that quiet person that just kind of like quietly connects with my subject matter. And so I've moved forward with that, where now I just take a gentler approach. I'm a little bit softer. And so I have these kind of points of connection where they feel a little bit more seen and comfortable with me. And I think it allows them to kind of shut out the room a little bit and just focus on me and my direction. I think we have moments where we can laugh. I've been told that sometimes I like smile behind the camera when I'm shooting. And so
Oh, yeah.
sometimes, without realizing it, I think if they're smiling, I smile, so it feels contagious.
Right.
I think there's these like little quiet moments that happen between myself and my subject, whether that be intentional or unintentional, create like a quiet bond. And so then I think them just feeling comfortable, they feel a little bit more at ease in to be able to try things like in a creative setting, to be like, oh, sure, I'll do that. And I won't feel weird for trying something new because I feel comfortable with Kyle. And so I think it allows both of us to have this creative space to kind of be silly, and try different things and maybe look silly or look goofy. So I'd say some of those are my tactics. I've gone away with the like, I don't need to be loud. I don't need to be overly like boisterous in volume. It's like I can be quiet behind the camera and still pull out these intimate moments with my subject that are needed.
Yeah, I think once the subject sits down in front of the camera, that's your moment to, okay, we're like, we just met, we need to interact, you need to trust me, you need to trust my direction and my vision. You know, and then hopefully they come to the set already knowing your work, so they already have that trust factor, because the trust factor, I think, is the first barrier to break between the model and the photographer. And then it's the comfort level, right? You know, I do a lot of shoots with portraits, and portraits are real people, and real people are always like, they look like rigor mortis, right? They're like stuck. You pose them, and you go put your hand here and that, and then they go, is this okay? And then they're just like a deer in headlights.
Absolutely.
So obviously it's much easier to shoot a model who knows the camera and knows their moves. But yeah, the trust factor and the comfort level is such an important part of that camaraderie between the photographer and the model. I know you said something about being, you know, on set and emulating what they're doing. I've been on set where I'm almost like posing like that. Like, I don't even know how it happens, but all of a sudden I'm like doing the shrugged shoulders, and I'm like, why am I doing this? It makes you like, everyone on set wants to like do what's happening on set, right? Like it just, but, and then, I mean, how do you, like at some point, sometimes you have to control the set too, because too many voices, right? It's like, we don't want to hear from anybody else because you and the model are who's in charge right now, right? And they're like, oh, put your hand here, do this, do that. Like, how do you get those people out of your hair?
Yeah, you know, I've had it before, and where people genuinely have the best intentions when they jump in with their own creative ideas. And I think sometimes it can be so helpful, and it's saved my butt, I'm sure, a few times, where somebody steps in and they go, hey, what if you try this? And you think, wow, it's a great idea. And I want everybody's voice to be heard on set and in the room. I want people to feel like they can creatively contribute, but there are times where you think like, don't do that. So sometimes if you've established a bit of that connection or trust with let's just say the person you're taking the portrait, or the subject if it's the model, you can kind of look at them and give them glances like, let's shoot a few of those and then let's go back to what you were doing, because I think that I prefer that visually. And sometimes it can help somebody feel heard and seen on set, and they get to see it on the monitor and they kind of go like, oh yeah, that's good, but I think I do prefer what and you're like, see, I'm glad we went back to that. So sometimes I entertain it for the sake of, let's see where this could go. And sometimes course correcting is super helpful. So I think subtle connections or just whispering, like it honestly comes down to that sometimes, where you're like, let's give it a shot, let's hear them out. I don't think I'm gonna love it. Like whatever it could be, if it's seated or laying down or whatever, leaning against something, you could be like, let's lean against this for a few, but I don't think we're gonna love it. So then sometimes you do have to be decisive. And sometimes being that like gentle, kind person that's still decisive on set can be tricky. But I'm really learning to just like, what's the best tone to be able to deliver this? And you could be like, I'm not loving this direction. Can we switch it up? And so sometimes if you're just like a little bit more direct with communication like that, that can also be helpful. And they'll be like, sure, yeah, let's change it. Yeah. And I've never had anybody that's negatively received information like that.
Yeah. Well, and thankfully now, because of technology, that we have the screens that we can look at right away. And, you know, it doesn't matter necessarily what someone sees over here, because it all depends on what you see, what the camera sees. So thankfully having that visual that we can look at and go, okay, yeah, right, that angle doesn't work
Yeah.
because actually you're not standing where the camera is. You are, right?
Yeah. And that's incredibly valid. That's such a good point. I've had that before where people will be like, what if you do this? And then they're like, no, 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 I don't like that angle. What if you shoot it from where I was standing? And then you do, and you're like, it's
Mm,
beautiful. Like, yeah, you did have a great perspective on this.
mhm,
And that was incredibly helpful. And
mhm.
everyone loves it, right? So there's totally value in it and merit in entertaining those thoughts and ideas. But you're right. When different people are standing at different points on the set, you get different vantage points. So it's like, oh, yeah, your perspective was different. And it does look better from over there. It didn't look good from where I was. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's also again the beauty of digital because we shoot, hundreds of shots, right? It's not like how many rolls of 36 do you want? It's you got to bang on, you got to get it in, a couple of rolls,
Yeah.
or and then it makes it really hard to scale it back and edit out and decide what you want. But that's also the exciting part when you're like, wow, there's so many good shots here. I don't
Yeah.
even know what we're going to choose because everything is just so great.
Yes. Very true.
Yeah.
And from a business perspective, I've also realized like there's ways that you can also kind of scale within the production. So sometimes like clients will actually just purchase more images and for more usage because you've taken so many amazing shots. They're like, oh, you know what, we can find other ways to use this. And so then they purchase more images.
Right.
So when I was starting out, I was like, oh, wait, this isn't a bad thing that I've shot, let's say, too much or shot a lot. It's like, oh no, this is actually maybe resulting in a little bit more money coming in too from the shoot. So this is helpful. So there's ways to kind of scale within its own production. And I'm like, okay, sweet. So this is like maybe ways for me to make a little bit of extra money. So maybe digital is also helpful in that way, but
Yeah. And then
yeah,
it helps you pump things out a little quicker as well.
true. Yeah.
Well, your work is great. I'm just really nice to chat with you and get your perspective on things. It sounds like you'd be a lot of fun on set. Someone great to work with, and I really appreciate our chat today.
Yeah, me too. It was very nice chatting with you, Cheryl. I appreciate you sitting down and sharing a coffee with me and getting to know one another.